It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when Jason, a man who prided himself on helping others, found himself in a situation that would make him question everything. As he drove down the empty stretch of highway, his eyes caught a woman on the side of the road, standing beside her car with a flat tire. Her face was a mix of frustration and concern, typical of someone stuck in the middle of nowhere with a problem they couldn't fix alone. Jason glanced at the rearview mirror, the highway stretching out behind him, and for a split second, thought about just driving past. But something in him wouldn't let him. He pulled over without a second thought. He didn't know her, didn't have any reason to get involved, but that didn't matter. His instincts told him to help. The woman, perhaps in her late 20s, looked at him with cautious relief as he approached. She introduced herself as Maya, her voice a little shaky. "I just need to change the tire," she said, almost apologetically, as though the inconvenience was her fault. Jason smiled and reassured her. "It's no problem at all." They made small talk while he worked, the kind of casual chatter that fills the air when strangers meet, a brief connection before they go their separate ways. As he finished tightening the bolts, Jason noticed something unusual. A black SUV had slowed down as it passed, only to slow even more. It hovered behind them, just far enough to seem nonchalant, but close enough to make Jason uneasy. He didn't think much of it at first, figuring it was just someone being cautious on the road. But as he stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, the SUV didn't drive off. It stayed there, idling just out of sight, its tinted windows hiding whatever might be going on inside. Jason tried to shake the feeling, putting it down to the late hour or the quiet isolation of the highway. Maya thanked him profusely, and he waved her off, ready to get back in his car and head home. But as he turned to get into his seat, the sound of the SUV's engine revving caught his attention. It was no longer idling, it was moving, and it was following him. At first, Jason thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the SUV was just heading in the same direction. But when he turned onto a smaller road and the black vehicle did the same, a chill ran down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but something told him this wasn't just random. His heart raced as he checked his rearview mirror. The SUV was still there, tailing him at a steady distance. No other cars on the road, just him and the black SUV. Panic began to rise. Was this a coincidence? Or had something about helping Maya drawn unwanted attention? Jason's mind raced as he tried to think through every possibility. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a strange feeling he had in the moment. But he couldn't shake the nagging suspicion. The black SUV was still following him, and there was no sign of it turning off the road. A flash of headlights in his rearview mirror confirmed what he had already feared. The SUV wasn't going anywhere. Jason's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He needed to lose the SUV. Fast. But no matter how many turns he took, no matter how many quick moves he tried, the black SUV remained there, always just behind him. What did they want? Why were they following him? As the road ahead darkened and the trees began to close in, Jason's mind raced with 1,000 questions. He had helped someone, and now he was paying the price. But what was the price? What was going to happen next? And most importantly, would he make it out of this alive? The tension was unbearable, and the only thing Jason knew for sure was that he needed to find out who was in that SUV before they found out who he was. And that's where the story takes an even darker turn. Stay tuned, because the answers Jason is about to uncover will leave you questioning everything. Jason's hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the steering wheel. His eyes darted from the rearview mirror to the winding road ahead, the only light coming from the headlights of his own car and the haunting glow of the black SUV behind him. He tried to stay calm, tried to tell himself it was just paranoia, that everything would be fine. But the longer the black SUV stayed behind him, the harder it became to believe that. He knew the road well. He had driven it countless times, always enjoying the solitude that came with it. It was the kind of road where you could lose yourself, get lost in your own thoughts, and forget about the hustle and bustle of the world. But now it felt different. The stillness in the air seemed too heavy, like something was about to break. He could feel the weight of the SUV's presence pressing on him. It was just a car, he told himself. There was no reason to panic. Yet, every time he glanced in the mirror, he saw it, the black SUV, its headlights burning brightly in the darkness, following him without a single sign of turning off. The feeling in his gut only grew stronger. He was being watched. Jason thought about Maya. Her gratitude had been genuine, but there had been something in her eyes. A fleeting look, like she knew something he didn't. It wasn't a feeling that came from the way she spoke or acted. It was something deeper, something unspoken. And now, this SUV, this strange, unsettling presence on the road, it all felt connected. The more he thought about it, the more his mind raced. He had done a good deed, hadn't he? He'd helped a woman with a flat tire. That was it. Just an act of kindness. He hadn't expected anything in return, and yet here he was, trapped in this eerie situation. Had he somehow crossed a line by helping someone in need? Was that what was happening? Was this punishment for a simple act of goodwill? Jason's thoughts turned to the worst-case scenario. What if he was in over his head? What if the people in that SUV weren't just ordinary drivers? What if they were following him for a reason? His pulse quickened, and he pushed his foot down harder on the accelerator, trying to outrun the unease settling in his chest. But no matter how fast he went, no matter how many turns he made, that black SUV stayed right there, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He turned onto a narrower, more isolated road, hoping to lose them. The trees that lined the sides of the road created an almost suffocating tunnel, the darkness swallowing up any hope of light. Jason glanced in the mirror again, and the black SUV was still there, its headlights like twin beacons in the night. It hadn't even slowed down. It was almost like they were playing a game, and Jason was the one trapped in it. A sudden wave of anger washed over him. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't asked for this. He just wanted to help. But now it felt like the universe had conspired against him, like his good intentions had led him into something far bigger than he could understand. He tried to think about the woman, Maya, and whether she could be connected to all of this. But the more he thought about her, the more confusing it became. Was she just a victim of circumstance, or was she involved in something darker? The way she had looked at him when he helped, the way her eyes flickered nervously, could she have known that someone would be following her? That someone might have been waiting for her to ask for help. Jason's mind spun in circles, and he shook his head, trying to push away the thoughts. There was no way to know. He was getting lost in his own head, making connections that weren't there. He needed to focus, to find a way out of this mess. But no matter what, he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was about to step into something dangerous. The SUV was still behind him. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and he sped up, urging his car to move faster, as if he could outrun the tension building up inside him. The sound of the engine hummed louder, almost drowning out the pounding of his heart. He glanced over his shoulder again, and this time, the black SUV had gotten closer. Too close. The headlights reflected in the mirror like the eyes of a predator, closing in on its prey. Jason's thoughts turned to the options in front of him. He could pull over and confront them, but that seemed like a terrible idea. He didn't even know who was in that SUV. What if they were dangerous? What if they had bad intentions? No, he needed to keep moving, but he also needed to think of a way to get rid of them. His mind raced for an escape plan. There was a turn ahead. If he took it fast enough, maybe he could lose them in the winding curves of the road. It was a risk, but it was the only chance he had. Jason took a deep breath and steered the car into the turn, his tires screeching as they fought for grip on the asphalt. His heart pounded in his chest, and he stole a quick glance in the mirror. The SUV was still behind him. The panic started to rise again. It was no use. No matter what he did, the black SUV was relentless, always there, never leaving. It was like it was tethered to him, refusing to let him go. Jason didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. He couldn't just drive forever. He had to stop. He had to figure out who these people were and what they wanted. But as he glanced up at the road ahead, his stomach dropped. There was no sign of any other cars. No streetlights, just more trees, more darkness. And then, out of nowhere, the SUV's headlights flashed. A bright, blinding flash, like a warning or a signal. It startled Jason, and for a split second, he swerved slightly, but he quickly corrected. What did the flash mean? Was it a message, or was it a threat? Jason had no answers. He only knew one thing for sure: something was closing in, and he needed to know what it was, before it was too late. Jason's eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. The flash from the SUV's headlights lingered in his mind, like some sort of unspoken signal. It didn't feel like an ordinary flash. It felt deliberate, like they were trying to tell him something, or warn him. The road had become a blur, the trees on either side a dark, silent wall. Jason's thoughts swirled in confusion. The SUV had been following him for miles now, and no matter how many turns he made or how fast he drove, they stayed right there. It was as if they had anticipated every move, staying a few paces behind, but never letting him get too far ahead. Each time he checked the mirror, the black SUV was still there, its headlights glaring back at him. His stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. He had no idea who was in that SUV, but everything about this situation screamed danger. There was no reason why anyone would follow him for this long without a good reason. It wasn't like he'd seen anything or done anything to provoke them, but still, it felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something he didn't understand. And then, just when Jason thought the tension might snap, a thought hit him like a cold rush of air. Maya, she had seemed so ordinary, so grateful for his help, but had she been hiding something? Jason couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with him was more than just a simple flat tire. What if she had let him into this? Maybe the moment he had stopped to help her had set this entire chain of events in motion. He remembered her face, the way her eyes had flickered when he approached her. She hadn't been just looking for assistance with a tire. There had been something else in her gaze, something deeper. It was a look he couldn't explain, like she was waiting for something, or maybe for someone. Maybe she knew this would happen. Maybe she had been expecting him to show up. The thought gnawed at him, unsettling his already tense nerves. He had been so eager to help, so sure that he was doing the right thing, but now he questioned everything. What if Maya had known the danger, had known someone would be following her? Had she been part of something all along? Jason's hands tightened around the steering wheel again. It was hard to swallow the possibility that he might have been a pawn in someone else's game. The question hung in the air, suffocating and unanswered. Another flash of headlights from the SUV jolted Jason from his thoughts, and this time it wasn't just a single flash. The headlights blinked 3 times, fast, almost like a coded message. Jason's pulse quickened. He hadn't imagined it this time. There was no doubt in his mind. Someone was trying to communicate with him, trying to send him a message. But what was it? Was it a warning? Or was it a signal that they were getting closer? He glanced around the car, looking for anything he could use. His mind raced for a plan, but nothing came. The road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, darker and more isolated with each passing mile. His options were running out. If he kept going, he would be deep in unfamiliar territory, away from help. If he turned around, the SUV would just follow him again. There was no way out. Jason was starting to feel trapped, like a rat in a maze. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was orchestrating this whole situation, that everything that had happened since he stopped for Maya was leading to something much larger, much more dangerous than he could understand. The tension in his chest grew, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. He needed answers. He couldn't keep running blindly like this, not without understanding who was behind all of this. And just when he thought he might lose control of the situation, the unthinkable happened. The black SUV sped up, closing the gap between them with alarming speed. Jason's heart slammed into his ribs as he slammed his foot on the gas pedal, trying to outpace them, but the SUV kept coming, relentless. He didn't know what was worse, the feeling of being chased or the growing sense that whatever was happening, it wasn't random. This was deliberate, and the more Jason tried to outrun it, the more it felt like the walls were closing in on him. His mind raced for a solution. Should he take a different route? Maybe a road that led to a town, the lights of civilization, maybe a police station. But what if it was too late? What if the people in the SUV were already waiting for him, ready to trap him before he even had the chance to get help? He had no answers, only questions, and the more he tried to think his way out of this, the more he realized how little he actually knew. Who were these people? Why were they following him? And what did they want? Jason's breathing was ragged now, his grip on the steering wheel almost painfully tight. He tried to focus on the road ahead, to think clearly, but everything felt foggy, like he was walking through a dream he couldn't wake up from. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the SUV's headlights disappeared. Jason blinked, unsure of what had just happened. 1 second, the black SUV had been right behind him, and the next, it was gone. He checked the rearview mirror again, his pulse pounding in his ears. Nothing. No headlights. No shadowy silhouette in the distance, just darkness. Had they given up? Was it over? Jason's mind raced with disbelief. The sudden absence of the SUV felt almost more unsettling than its presence. He had expected the chase to continue. He had expected them to follow him until he couldn't go any further. But now, nothing. The emptiness in the rearview mirror felt like a bad omen. Jason slowed down, his eyes scanning the road, his heart still hammering in his chest. The silence in the car was deafening. He was alone again, but for how long? And who exactly was he alone from? Had the people in the SUV decided to back off, or had they simply found another way to trap him? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp noise, the sound of something scraping against the car. Jason slammed on the brakes, his eyes wide with panic. His car jolted to a stop, and he immediately glanced around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a shadow in the trees. He wasn't alone. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he froze, staring at the shadow in the trees. It wasn't just any shadow, it was a figure. A person, standing perfectly still, half hidden among the thick trunks and dark foliage. For a moment, Jason thought it might be his mind, playing tricks on him, the exhaustion and panic twisting his perception. But then the figure shifted, just slightly, and Jason knew with a sickening certainty that he wasn't imagining it. He wasn't alone. His hand shook as he reached for the door handle, ready to make a run for it if necessary. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching him, or at least that's what it felt like. Jason's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Had the people in the SUV somehow orchestrated this too? Was this person a lookout, a trap? He couldn't be sure. He didn't have time to figure it out. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but the figure in the trees was enough to make him hesitate. Jason needed to make a decision, and he needed to make it fast. His mind screamed at him to leave, to get out of there before whatever was happening caught up to him. But his feet felt glued to the ground. His hands felt frozen on the steering wheel, unsure of what to do next. The silence outside was almost unbearable, broken only by the sound of his own racing breath and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The shadowy figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. Jason had no way of knowing if it was watching him or just waiting for him to make the next move. But every second felt like an eternity, each heartbeat louder than the last. The tension in the air was palpable, a suffocating presence that seemed to press in from all sides. Jason's thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. What if this was all a setup? What if the SUV, the mysterious flashing headlights, and the figure in the trees were part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined? He had no answers, only an overwhelming sense of dread. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't stay in the car, unable to move, unable to make a decision. If he stayed put, the situation would only get worse. But if he left the safety of the car, he'd be exposed, vulnerable to whatever was lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, the figure in the trees took a step forward. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The figure's movement was slow, deliberate, and Jason couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body framed by the shadows. Every instinct in him screamed to drive away, to get as far from this place as possible. But a part of him couldn't look away. It was as if something in his gut told him that this person, this mysterious figure, held the key to everything that had been happening. The figure took another step, closer this time. Jason's mind spun faster, trying to calculate his next move. He was stuck between two terrifying choices: stay and face whatever this was, or run, blindly, into the unknown. His foot hovered over the gas pedal, but before he could make a decision, the figure raised their hand. Jason's stomach twisted. The hand was slow, deliberate, as though the person was trying to communicate something words. The figure's hand lowered, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Jason felt trapped, his entire body tense, unsure of what was happening next. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on him from all sides. The figure didn't move any closer, but neither did they retreat. They were just standing there, staring. Jason couldn't tell if they were waiting for something, or if they were simply making sure he didn't leave. And then the silence shattered. A low, rumbling sound broke through the tension, the unmistakable growl of an engine. Jason's heart skipped again. He whipped his head around to the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the black SUV was back. But this time, it wasn't following from a distance. It was close, too close. The headlights illuminated the road like two burning eyes, casting long shadows across the trees and the ground around him. The SUV was moving fast, too fast, and Jason felt the sickening weight of inevitability settle in his chest. He didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know who was in that SUV or why they were following him. But as the vehicle drew nearer, Jason realized he had no choice but to face it head-on. There was nowhere to run. There was no escape. The figure in the trees was still there, watching, waiting. But now the focus of Jason's fear was the SUV, which was closing the gap with terrifying speed. It was almost as if the figure in the trees had summoned the SUV, as if everything was coming together in some twisted, planned sequence. Jason's mind raced. Was this all connected? Was he just a pawn in some larger game? The headlights of the black SUV grew brighter, blinding him as the vehicle bore down on him. Jason slammed his foot on the gas, but it was too late. The SUV was already too close. He could hear the engine roaring, and for a moment, he felt like he was suffocating in the sound, trapped in a nightmarish moment where everything was closing in on him. The figure in the trees still hadn't moved. Jason couldn't understand it. What was their role in all of this? Were they a part of the plan? Were they watching to see if he would survive whatever was coming? The SUV was almost upon him now, the sound of its engine deafening, drowning out everything else. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He had no idea what to do, no way to fight back, no escape. And then, just as the SUV was about to overtake him, it swerved violently, tires screeching against the asphalt. Jason's heart stopped as the vehicle veered off the road, disappearing into the trees, its headlights fading into the distance. The sound of the engine faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the night air. For a split second, everything was still, silent, but Jason knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. Whatever had just happened, whatever game he had just stumbled into, wasn't finished. And deep down, Jason knew the worst was still yet to come. Jason sat frozen in the driver's seat, his mind a blur of confusion and fear. The SUV had swerved into the trees, and for a moment, he thought he might finally be safe. The sound of its engine slowly faded into the night, leaving nothing but the distant rustling of leaves. His breath came in shallow gasps, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. The world around him seemed still, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this brief calm was only temporary. His fingers trembled as he slowly eased the car back into motion. The road ahead remained empty, but Jason couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his gut that something wasn't right. It felt like a trap that was just waiting for him to make a wrong move. He glanced once more at the trees where the SUV had disappeared, half expecting to see the vehicle suddenly reappear, but the shadows remained undisturbed. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. He needed answers. Just as he was about to reach for his phone to call someone, anyone, a sudden sound broke the silence. A low, eerie hum, like the buzz of an engine. Jason's blood ran cold. It was distant at first, barely audible, but it grew louder with each passing second. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his heart racing again. The sound came from behind him, and Jason felt the cold realization sweep over him. The SUV wasn't gone, it had circled back. His foot slammed on the brake, the car jerking to a stop, and he whipped his head toward the rearview mirror. The SUV was there, but this time, something was different. It wasn't driving down the road, it was coming from the trees. It had somehow emerged from the forest, as though it had been waiting, hidden in the darkness. The headlights of the black vehicle pierced the night, brighter and more menacing than before. Jason's heart raced. How did they get back so fast? His mind couldn't process it. He'd just seen the SUV swerve off the road, he was sure of it. But now it was here, like it had never left. Panic set in. Jason's foot hovered between the brake and the gas pedal, torn between speeding away and staying put, trying to make sense of the impossible. There was no place to hide, no safe place to run. The road ahead remained the same, silent and unyielding, but it felt like the walls were closing in. The hum of the SUV's engine was growing louder, and Jason felt the heavy pressure in his chest. Every instinct in him screamed to get away, but the night around him felt like a trap. The SUV was now right behind him, its headlights illuminating the rearview mirror like twin fires in the dark. Jason's pulse quickened, his mind racing. Why wasn't it stopping? The distance between him and the vehicle was closing with terrifying speed. Jason's eyes darted from the road ahead to the mirror and back again, trying to calculate his next move. But there was nothing. He had no escape. And then something even more disturbing happened. The SUV's headlights flickered, just for a moment, and then suddenly, the vehicle's engine cut off. The silence that followed was worse than the roar of the engine. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the rearview mirror. The black SUV was now completely still, eerily motionless, as though it had been abandoned. Jason's gut twisted in dread. What was happening? Why was the vehicle just sitting there? Was it a trap? Were they waiting for him to make a move? Or worse, what if someone else was in the car, waiting for the perfect moment to ambush him? His pulse quickened again, and he instinctively reached for the door handle, ready to bolt if necessary. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't risk it. But as he moved to start the car again, something caught his eye. A figure, just behind the SUV, emerging from the trees. It was the same person who had been watching him earlier, the figure he had seen standing in the shadows. Jason's mind reeled. How had they gotten so close? How had they known where he was? The figure was moving slowly, deliberately toward him. Jason's heart raced in his chest, the air suddenly thick with dread. He couldn't make out their face, but there was no mistaking the purposeful way they moved. They were coming closer, each step echoing like a countdown in Jason's mind. His body felt frozen, his brain unable to process the surreal nature of what was unfolding before him. The figure raised a hand, just as they had done earlier, and this time, Jason's breath caught in his throat. Was it a warning? A signal? Jason couldn't be sure, but he knew this much. He had no more time to waste. Without thinking, he slammed his foot on the gas and took off, tires screeching as the car lurched forward. His heart raced as the SUV's headlights flickered back to life, the vehicle roaring back into motion. But Jason didn't look back. He focused solely on the road, the darkness around him, and the blur of trees passing by. He wasn't sure where he was headed anymore, But he couldn't stop. He couldn't let them catch him. And then, just as he sped around another bend, something shocking happened. A flash of lights, bright and blinding, flashed across the road, stopping him dead in his tracks. Jason slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping in his chest. The lights were everywhere now, flooding the area around him like an explosion of brightness. They weren't coming from the SUV. They weren't coming from anywhere on the road. Instead, they seemed to come from the sky itself, like a signal, like a command. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. The lights were not just a signal. They were a warning, a final message. And then, in the flashing light, Jason saw it, something he couldn't explain. A figure, silhouetted against the blinding brightness, standing in the middle of the road. This time, Jason was sure of it. He wasn't alone. And whatever was happening now, whatever had led him here, was about to become much more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Jason's foot slammed on the brake, the car coming to a screeching halt. The blinding light was now everywhere, flooding the entire road, and for a moment he couldn't see a thing. His heart pounded in his chest, every muscle in his body locked in place, unsure whether to fight, run, or stay put. The figure standing in the middle of the road was close now, closer than he had ever expected, and Jason's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. As the lights flickered and slowly dimmed, the figure began to step forward, moving with slow, deliberate steps. Jason's breath caught as he recognized the figure's silhouette. It wasn't just any stranger, it was Maya. His heart stopped for a beat. Maya. How was she here? What was going on? Jason's thoughts raced, every piece of the puzzle falling into place, but none of it made sense. He had thought the entire situation was spiraling out of control, that he was being dragged into something far too dangerous for him to understand. But Maya's presence here, at this exact moment, completely changed everything. She stopped just a few feet from the front of his car, her face illuminated by the dimming lights. There was no mistaking the cold determination in her eyes. This wasn't the grateful woman he had helped earlier. The person standing in front of him now was someone different, a stranger wearing her face, someone who had been hiding something all along. Maya, what is going on? Jason's voice was barely a whisper, the weight of his confusion pressing down on him. Her lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. You really don't know, do you? Jason's mind was spinning. He wanted to ask 1,000 more questions, to demand answers, but his mouth felt dry. The truth was within reach, but the pieces didn't fit. Maya's calmness, the figure in the trees, the black SUV, it was all too much to take in. Before he could say anything more, the low hum of engines rumbled again, this time much louder, shaking the ground beneath him. The black SUV emerged from the darkness once more, but this time it wasn't alone. Several other vehicles, all black, all sleek, all unlovingly identical, pulled onto the road behind her. Jason's heart skipped a beat. What was this asterisk? Maya turned her gaze towards the approaching cars, her eyes narrowing slightly. It's over now. You've been part of this from the moment you stopped to help me. But the real question is, do you know why you've been involved? Her voice was cool, almost detached, and Jason felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The cars stopped, surrounding Jason's vehicle on all sides, their engines idling as the silence returned. Maya walked slowly to the side of the car, her steps calculated, her expression unreadable. Jason could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, suffocating him. Do you remember the flashing lights? The way the SUV kept following you? That wasn't just coincidence, she continued, her words hanging in the air like a storm. You were chosen. The moment you stopped to help me with that flat tire, you unknowingly became a part of something much bigger. A test to see who could handle it. Jason's stomach dropped. Get test. None of this made sense. What are you talking about? What test? Jason's voice cracked, his confusion turning into frustration. Why all this? Why me? Maya paused for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as though weighing something heavy. Then, almost like she had made a decision, she stepped closer to his window. The coldness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else, something darker. "Because," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "you're the one who can stop it." Jason blinked, his mind racing. Stop what? Before Maya could respond, one of the other vehicles in the circle roared to life. The door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He was tall, his face sharp and unreadable. As he approached, Jason's gut twisted. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. "Maya," the man said, his voice like ice, "you were supposed to handle this more carefully. But it's too late now. We'll have to proceed as planned." He glanced at Jason, his gaze cold. "He's the one, isn't he?" Maya gave a slight nod. "He is. But he's not ready." Jason's mind reeled. Asterisk greedy for what asterisk? The man stepped closer, his expression turning sharper. "You've been caught in the middle of something far beyond your understanding. But it's time to choose. You can walk away from this, go back to your life, forget what happened here. Or you can take the step that changes everything. It's your choice, Jason. But know this, there's no turning back." Jason could barely breathe. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. Asterisk what was he supposed to do? Asterisk, how was he supposed to make a decision like this? Maya had been playing him all along, and now it seemed he had no choice but to follow whatever path they wanted him to walk. But as the tension in the air thickened, something unexpected happened. Jason noticed a small, almost imperceptible flicker of movement near one of the other vehicles. For a split second, he thought he saw a face, someone he recognized. His heart stopped. It was the same person he had seen in the rearview mirror before, but this time they weren't just watching, they were smiling, and their eyes were filled with something Jason hadn't noticed before, a quiet, knowing certainty. Before he could even process the realization, the man in the suit turned to him, his eyes hardening. "This is your last chance. Make the choice now." Jason's pulse raced. He wasn't sure what the right answer was. He wasn't even sure what asterisk this asterisk was, or what it all meant. But as he looked around, the weight of it all hit him. There were no easy answers, no simple way out. Jason's mind raced as the figure in the back seat of the SUV stared back at him. The face, though eerily familiar, was not Maya's. In fact, it wasn't a face he recognized at all. For a moment, it seemed like his entire world had turned upside down. The pieces he had been trying to fit together, the clues he had been chasing, now seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. The man in the suit, sensing Jason's confusion, let out a low sigh. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" His voice was cold, deliberate, and every word felt like a weight sinking into Jason's chest. "Maya was never who you thought she was. None of this was by chance. She's been part of something much bigger. And now, so are you." Jason blinked, his heart pounding in his ears. The SUV, now eerily still, felt like a prison closing in on him. The man's words cut through the tension, but instead of giving him clarity, they only deepened the confusion. He wanted to scream, to ask more questions, but all he could do was stare at the figure in the backseat, the haunting, knowing expression staring back at him. "What? What do you want from me?" Jason finally managed to croak, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. The man in the suit stepped forward, his face expressionless, but with an almost imperceptible hint of regret. "We never wanted to involve you in this, Jason, but you were the one who crossed the line. The moment you helped Maya, everything changed." He paused, his eyes locking with Jason's. "You're the key. You're the one who can stop all of this." Jason's mind was spinning. Asterisk the key asterisk to what? To stopping what? He was in over his head, far deeper than he ever imagined. This wasn't just a simple case of a good deed gone wrong. No, this was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that had been unfolding long before he ever stopped to help. You don't understand, the man continued. Maya, she's part of a much larger operation. She was placed in your path to lead you here. You, Jason, were always meant to be involved, whether you liked it or not. Jason's throat tightened. He felt trapped. The more the man spoke, the less he understood. His mind raced back to the flat tire, to the moment he had pulled over to help. He had done it out of kindness, out of nothing more than the need to help someone in trouble. But now it seemed like that simple act had set off a chain of events that he couldn't control. I didn't sign up for this, Jason said, his voice growing more desperate. I just helped someone in need. That's all. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? The man took another step forward, the tension palpable in the air. He looked at Jason, his eyes almost pitying. It's not about what we want from you. It's about what you can do. You see, Maya's mission was always about finding someone who could handle the truth, and you're the one who can face it. Jason swallowed hard. Asterisk, the truth, asterisk, what truth? What had Maya been hiding all this time? And why had he been dragged into this mess? The man in the suit motioned toward the SUV, where the mysterious figure still stared at him from the back seat. That is the truth, Jason. You're the one who can stop it. But you'll have to make a choice. A choice that will change everything. Jason's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment that would define his future. But how could he make a decision like this? What was he supposed to choose between? He had no idea what was at stake. He had no idea what was even real anymore. Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted his thoughts. Jason whipped around in alarm, his heart racing. But when he turned back, the figure in the backseat was gone. The SUV was empty. What the hell? Jason breathed, his mind reeling. His eyes darted to the other vehicles that surrounded him, but the drivers had all vanished as well. The eerie silence that had hung over the scene now seemed deafening, as though the entire world had frozen. And then, like a light bulb flicking on, it hit him. Maya had been part of this, but she wasn't the one pulling the strings. The entire situation, everything that had led him here, had been a setup. A test. But not for him, it was for someone else. Someone who had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the strings and bring everything to a head. Jason's thoughts raced. He looked around, his heart pounding, realizing that the entire ordeal was bigger than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't the one who had been chosen. No, he was just a pawn in a much larger game, a game that was far from over. The truth, the real truth, was still out there. It was in the shadows, hidden beneath layers of lies and deception. And now Jason had the choice. The choice to either walk away and forget everything he had just witnessed, or step into the unknown and uncover the full extent of what he had just uncovered. His hand gripped the door handle, but as he took a deep breath, he knew that there was no going back. Not now. Not after everything he had seen. Not after everything that had happened. In the distance, he saw the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The quiet hum of the world returning to life around him only made the weight of the decision heavier. But Jason knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. As he stepped out of the car, the weight of the choice pressed down on him. Whatever came next, Jason was ready to face it, but he wasn't walking into the unknown alone. Maya, the mysterious figure, the people behind this entire web of deception, they were all still out there. And now, Jason had the key to uncover it all. And with that, he took the first step into a new chapter, leaving the questions, the confusion, and the fear behind, only to realize that what lay ahead was far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The story was just beginning.